Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair for coming. It's our pleasure to have with us Sheikh Islam Mossad. He has served an Imam for the Islamic Center of Little Rock, Islamic Center of Bryan College, and North Austin Muslim Community Center. He has been engaged in Islamic work in the United States from his childhood until the present. He also taught high school Islamic studies and Quran at Renaissance Academy. He is a graduate of University of Texas at Austin with a bachelor's in chemical engineering. He has studied from many scholars to attain his knowledge in Islam, and he has in the memorization of the Quran, in the narration of Hafs an Asim and Shu'ba an Asim. Sheikh Islam specializes in tarbiyah development and is also active in the broader community to make a positive impact while representing Islam. Among his passions is to work to see Muslims in the United States become a leading community that sets the bar for the whole world in doing collective good and efficiency. Without further introduction, Sheikh Islam, thank you for being with us. Tfaddal.
Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا ما علمتنا وزدنا علما. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the peace and blessings be upon his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We ask Allah to teach us that which will be of benefit to us and to benefit us with that which he has taught us and to increase us in knowledge. I remind myself and the brothers and sisters how the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, مَجْتَمَعَ قَوْمٌ فِي بَيْتٍ مِنْ بُيُوتِ اللَّهِ that whenever a group of people they meet in one of the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يَتْلُونَ الْقُرْآنَ وَيَتَدَارَسُونَهُ بَيْنَهُمْ and they recite the Quran and they study it amongst themselves. So the setup right now is a little bit different. It's kind of like putting the onus on me to give and then y'all are passively listening. But the best way for transmission of knowledge is actually, this is why we call it a halaqah, is when you're sitting in a circle and there are many contributors to what is being studied. There may be a person of knowledge who guides and facilitates, but there's still participation. So at certain points, inshallah, I'll encourage you all to participate and I'm sure many knowledgeable and experienced brothers and sisters, inshallah ta'ala. But in any case, when this happens, when people get together in one of the houses of Allah and they recite the Quran and study it amongst themselves, نَزَلَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّكِينَةِ. So then tranquility descends upon them. So this is actually, believe it or not, something rare for people to sit down in a lecture or discussion kind of format. Nowadays, it's not that common. But this is how we can achieve sakina, by being together with the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being with our brothers and sisters. It brings down the sakina, number one. This is the words of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Nazalat alayhim as-sakina, and also the angels surround them. Haffathum al-malaika, wa ghashiyatuhum ar-rahmah. In addition, mercy envelops them. Subhanallah. As well, wa dhakarahum Allah fi man indah, and Allah mentions them to those who are in His presence, which are to the angels. Subhanallah. So this is already a great start, the fact that we are here this evening, alhamdulillah. The topic that I was assigned was a healthy marriage in Islam. And this is a huge topic. I'm not going to go into statistics. Sometimes we're not sure how accurate they are, but for sure there is a crisis when it comes to marriage, and there is higher levels of concern that people, compared to our parents and their parents, people are more likely to go through one or two divorces. So this is something that really deserves attention, that we need to look at both as community members, but also as imams and teachers parents, what are we missing? What are we doing wrong? Is it simply societal factors and the context in which we now live, especially for Muslims in the West? But also we see similar types of rising levels of divorce even in the majority Muslim countries as well. So there's something going on for sure. So I think it's best to start with the Quranic notion, because sometimes people make very strange statements about marriage, even in books which say, oh, these are Islamic books, but they skip over what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes in the Quran. And just to share with you something very strange, a sister sent me, she's a convert to Islam. She was very upset because in the book, she sent me a screenshot of it. It said, basically a woman is a slave to her husband. I don't know who translated these books, but how they speak, and she must do whatever he commands. And the way that it was being presented is not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents it in the Quran. It's a very beautiful flower that is presented in the Quran. Of course, you all know it, you all hear it if you have a nikah, or you go to a nikah, or you get an invitation to a nikah. I don't know if anybody wants to do a nikah tonight. We have plenty of witnesses, and then we could make it a practical session instead of a theoretical one. So that verse, of course, is Surah Al-Rum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Ba'd a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يتفكرون ومن آياته خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف ألسنتكم وألوانكم إن في ذلك لآيات للعالمين. So I deliberately said the verse after it too, because there is a connection which is relevant for our experience as Muslims living in the West in diverse communities. So the translation from Surah Al-Rum is said from the signs of Allah. So an ayah is something which points to some aspect of Allah, His greatness, His majesty, His care, His wisdom. It can also be equivalent to something which is miraculous, something which is amazing. So that it already has not just a positive connotation towards marriage, but it gives it, even though in Islam we don't have marriage as a sacrament, as they do in the Catholic Church, for example, it gives it a sense of holiness and connecting it, that this is one of the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the ayat of Allah are to be treated with a greater degree of reverence and a greater degree of respect. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُمْ, that He has created for you from yourselves. And so this is the interesting part, that as men and women, in other parts of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, بَعْضُكُم مِّن بَعْضٍ, that you are one from the other. So believe it or not, if you look at Western views on women as they evolved, very strange views, whether women and men are even of the same essence or not, or whether they are some other kind of creature, astaghfirullah, or something. So, but Allah very clearly says, you are one from the other, min anfusikum azwajan, your complementary pair. For what purpose? What is the purpose of marriage? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, to find the sakina, to find the tranquility. So that is the stated purpose in this verse. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. So people may go into marriage with many different intentions, but the Quranic intention is said لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, simply as that. That the human being is not meant to be in dunya, meant to be alone facing and weathering the storms, that they are to have companionship with for the man with a woman, for the woman with a man, and that they are to be the nucleus and foundation for the community, for communities such as this, for example. At its nucleus is a man and a woman, even before there are kids. Right? So, is that there is to be an equilibrium that is established and a balance that is made between the inner world of a man and the inner world of a woman, to have this sakina, litaskunu ilayha. And this is why it is so important. We have the hadith about Iblis, that he sits on his throne and he says to his devils, he has other minions and devils, he's not just doing the work all by himself. So he says, whoever, he wants the report, he needs them to give the report, and whoever gives him the best kind of report of an achievement, of course, in the evil achievement, then they will get to sit closer to Iblis. The better achievement they make from their perspective, then the closer they sit to Iblis. So one of them, for example, says, oh, I got this person to commit zina, or I got this person to drink alcohol, or I got this person. And Iblis is like, okay, no big deal, no big deal. Why? Because that person can, of course, there are major sins, but the person can repent, come back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then one of them says that فَرَّقْتُ بَيْنَ اثْنَيْنِ. So he separated between two people who loved each other. So especially between the husband and the wife. So this is what Iblis says we need more of, like this. So he says, come closer, come closer. So this is clearly the target is the nucleus of the human society, of the human community, is the relationship between, subhanAllah, between a husband and wife. And I don't know if we have any nuclear physicists in here, but when you mess with a nucleus, you know what can happen. So maybe we shouldn't say in the masjid atomic bomb or anything like this, but it can be very destructive, which is true, and we're seeing it. Again, you can see the statistics for yourself about how many people who are in the prison system are coming from single-parent households and so on. So it's a very destructive force when this sakina, which Allah says is the purpose of marriage, is not present. Because that sakina that is inshallah between the husband and the wife, it envelops the children as well in that sakina, in that bigger cover for the whole family. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He has placed between you mawadda. Mawadda is a natural affinity and attraction. You could translate it as love as well, because wood is a type of love. In Islam, there are different words to refer to different types of love. So it could be also this is love, which is usually, again, in the Western understanding of marriage, that it's not something alien to Islam. That two people who love each other. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, there's nothing better for two people who love each other than marriage. So it is part of our Islamic tradition. Cultures where Muslims predominate, the way that they look at love and express love is not necessarily consistent with what the Prophet ﷺ said or did or taught. You know, even between brothers, right? So when the Prophet was with one of the Sahaba and a man was passing by, he said, Ya Rasulullah, I love that person. And then he said, did you tell him that? He said, no. He said, go and tell him that you love him. So to express this love. And when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was asked, who is ahabbu nasi ilayk? He said, who is the most beloved person to you? He wasn't shy in a public gathering to say, my wife. So this is something ordinary from an Islamic perspective. I don't know what happened culturally, where parents do not express love verbally to their children as much, and they do not express love between the spouses verbally. But this is actually part of the deen, and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he encouraged expressions of love and even of romance there are many examples with his wives, Ridwanullahi alayhim. وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مُوَدَّةً. So it's this is what is I'm not going to say the ideal marriage, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He puts something in the Quran, He's not putting an unrealizable ideal. He's putting something that is actually real and can be attained and has been, alhamdulillah, in many families has been attained. Of course, there are conflicts every now and then, but the baseline should be this verse from Surah Al-Rum, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. That's placed between you this mawaddah, this love, affinity, as well as rahmah. So the ability to forgive, the ability to overlook, not every single minor infraction from the man or from the woman, that it becomes an explosive situation and the end of the relationship. And again, maybe the young people don't have an opportunity to hear this or to understand this. But now, alhamdulillah, there are some imams and some institutes like the Family and Youth Institute where they try to educate and do premarital counseling to try to instill within the young couple this resilience when you're facing conflict or difficult situations. And the underlying approach should be rahmah. So you love that person, you married that person, you have a mithaqan ghalidha, you have a firm covenant, strong covenant with that person. So the rahmah comes in to be able to forgive, to overlook. It doesn't mean to ignore serious issues, but it means to approach them with rahmah and to address them with rahmah. And this is, again, the characteristic of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the characteristic of the deen. The whole deen is rahmah, and the Prophet is described as وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have sent you but nothing except as a mercy for all of creation, not just the human beings, but for all of creation. So how about the person who is dearest to us, our own spouse? Which is, again, very strange. A lot of times people are very friendly and nice with co-workers or at the masjid, but for some reason when they get home, whether it's from the wife's side or from the man's side, sometimes they can be very harsh and very cruel towards one another. There may be some underlying resentment that is going on that isn't being verbalized or expressed, and it's being manifested, in that kind of way. And I think it would have been instructive, perhaps in a future session, to also bring in those, professional marriage counselors and therapists, because there is a lot that psychology and therapy and the study of marriage has a lot to offer in concert with the Islamic teachings from the Quran and Sunnah as well. Both of them, I think, when they go hand in hand, then there will be great benefit. So he said, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مُوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. He has placed between you this love, this affection, this affinity, and has also placed between you the rahmah. He said, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. He said, in this are signs for people who reflect and who think. Then the verse that comes after, so a young man came up to me, he's from a particular country, and he wants to marry a woman from a different cultural background, and his parents are totally upset, like, no way, even though both families, they're acculturated here in the United States. And again, there's this problem of a cultural way of thinking. Not all culture is bad and not all culture is good. You have to submit it to the filter of Islam. So this verse, right after the verse of marriage, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. And from His signs is the creation of the heavens and the earth. Then He said, وَاخْتِلَافُ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ. So it's not an accident that this verse is coming right after the verse on marriage. It's an obvious encouragement that part of the ayat of Allah is also the differences in your languages and your colors. And so this is an encouragement, in spite of differences in your language and color, to come together as azwajan litaskunu ilayha. And this is kind of like a little side note, but they say the hikmah of the Prophet ﷺ having multiple marriages was to establish a very diverse sunnah in terms of choosing a spouse. So he was married to Sayyidah Khadija, who was older than him, who was a widow, businesswoman. He was married to Sayyidah Aisha, who was much younger than him. He was married to his cousin. He was married to a woman from a Jewish tribe, radiallahu anhum. He was married to a woman who was black. He was married to, so it's many different varieties to show that this goodness, you don't know where you will find it, in what person and in what their particular circumstances. But for some reason, nowadays in Muslim communities, once a certain label is put on a person, whether it's an ethnic label or a language label, or that they're divorced or that they're widowed or whatever it is, then all of a sudden this becomes an obstruction for that person to be married. And it's something that we need to know. In Islam, Allah says very clearly, وَأَنْكِحُوا الْأَيَامَ مِنْكُمْ وَالصَّالِحِينَ مِنْ عِبَادِكُمْ وَإِمَائِكُمْ. So Allah is saying the default should be to make marriage easy and to encourage and to get young people, to get single people married. Even in this particular verse, in that early context also, even if it is to marry a slave, subhanAllah. So this is something which is a default. So I said a lot of different things all at once, but I do want to hear some participation, inshaAllah ta'ala, before we continue. If any of the sisters or any of the brothers have reflections that they want to share on these three concepts of sakina, of mawadda, and of rahmah, which we find in Surah Al-Rum. So this is your chance, inshallah. So we'll start with one of the brothers, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair. It's a very hard topic, and mashallah, you introduced it very well. Jazakallah khair. It is just like a point of opinion. We all vary from that, but my point is about the getting married from different culture. Different culture, a lot of things, and I always look at the marriage, it's not just between man and woman, but between families. So the problem for the young couple will not be a problem, particularly they both raised here. But the problem comes with the family from both sides. If they have a distance or a gap in the culture, generally speaking, without getting into details. So, that's again my opinion, but everybody is different. I still believe that if you marry from the same culture, would be a successful marriage, not because of the young couples, but the two families they got together. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair. Yeah, definitely kafa'a and being kuf, like being compatible, is part of it. It's part of the equation, but it should never be the reason why we say absolutely not. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said very clearly, "Man ja'akum," whoever is coming to you, تَرْضَوْنَ خُلُقَهُ وَدِينَهُ فَزَوِّجُوهُ. So the more important thing is, are they aligned Islamically? Because I'm assuming, alhamdulillah, we're coming to the masjid. That means we at least understand that the higher way is to be aligned Islamically. So I can get over cultural differences if the family, not just the boy and the girl, as you mentioned, their families are also getting connected. Both families, even if they're from different parts of the world, but if both families value the Quran and the Sunnah as the ultimate ideal and value, and if they see that the young man and the young woman, they also have similar values, I think that overrides, and it allows for a greater richness and crossover between different cultures. So it is something that should be discussed, but the situation that I mentioned, it was an absolute no, just because they're from a different culture. There are other situations where it's not just culture. So there are people that I know even here in the United States, they ask them, okay, are you from the same country? Are you from the same city? Are you from the same town? From the same tribe? And they're doing this in America, right? And so they're limiting their young man, young woman to something very narrow compared to, unfortunately, the haram is very easy and they're making the halal too difficult. So this is why the Prophet said, تَكُنْ فِتْنَةٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَفَسَادٌ كَبِيرٌ. There will be great turmoil, trial, tribulation, and also great corruption when marriage is made difficult. Of course, marriage is a very serious commitment, and I believe that both man and woman should get educated. If there's premarital counseling, there's no shame. Even if there are no problems going on, there's no problem in going to a premarital counselor, getting a perspective of a person who is dealing with these situations day in, day out. I think that's can only add value to the situation. When I first started as an imam, I was very excited and passionate, and I used to require, if I'm going to marry you, then marry you to each other, then we have to do at least 3 sessions of marriage, pre-marriage counseling. But now I don't require it. I became too relaxed. So nowadays people come to me, they still come to the imams on the same day and say, want to get, subhanallah. But even though I myself am not requiring it, I think it is something that is highly recommended for people who are getting married to do some premarital counseling to align themselves to what to expect, inshallah ta'ala. How about from the sisters? They have the opportunity as well. Yes. Sometimes the brothers talk more than sometimes the sisters talk more. Inshallah. Okay. Did you have something you wanted to ask or comment? Yeah, inshallah.
Alaikum. Jazakallah khair for this very interesting topic. I think the problem is the gap between generations because like our youth from different culture, they grow up here in America together, so they don't see differences. Their language are the same, their culture are the same. I think the problem is with the first immigrants because they came from different backgrounds and it's still hard to imagine that your kid is getting married to somebody not from your culture.
Yeah.
Basically, even within the same languages, even within the same Arabic country, it's hard, to marry from different cultures still. So, what do you think? How do we close the gap? How do we make those first immigrants change their minds, come closer to their generation? Because that's gonna be the future. It's, as you said, it's making it easier for them. And it's there's not so many options, unfortunately. So we don't want to limit their options in marriage. We want to really have the big options for them. So what's your stand on that?
I think it requires an honest conversation. I would recommend, for example, bringing in younger people along with their parents in a forum, having an open discussion about these issues, so that they can hear what are their parents' concerns, legitimate concerns, what are the young people's legitimate concerns. But always the priority should be to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be consistent with the values and teachings of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That should override every other consideration. So I would encourage just more open conversation. I think young people, a lot of times they feel that when they approach their parents just close the door, and so then they begin to suppress and find other avenues for different things instead of having an honest conversation. And you have this example, beautiful example of Yusuf alayhi salam as a young boy. He has no problem in sharing with his father. He said, Ya abati, he said, oh my dear father, إني رأيت أحد عشر كوكبا والشمس والقمر until the end. And then Yaqub alayhi salam having this intimate conversation with his son. This is the Islamic ideal, which is openness. Ibrahim alayhi salam, the same thing with Ismail. إني أرى في المنام أني أذبحك فانظر ماذا ترى, getting his input. But again, I'm sure you have come across the same thing. There's some people who say, I can't say anything to my parents. I can't. Sometimes even when I was younger, I would joke around with my dad, and one of the brothers said, how can you do that? You're not allowed to joke with your dad. I said, what's the problem? Sometimes, people, I think, they allow cultural considerations to override Islamic considerations, but it should be the vice versa. The Islamic consideration should override the cultural ones. So the next part I was going to go into is the more, so that was a clear Quranic verse, which talked about tranquility, love, mercy, compassion. We're not saying, just to be like new age Muslim, we're going to talk about these soft things. No, this is the Quran itself. But also there is the practical dimension of marriage, which is the more, I would say, traditionally way of talking about marriage in Islam, which is also something that we should address, which is the idea of rights and responsibilities, of huquq and wajibat. Because it is called a aqd, it is called a contract. So there are two parties, and both parties, they have certain rights and responsibilities. And you can read articles, you can read books about what are the rights of the wife from her husband. It's very clear from the Quran and Sunnah that he provides for her, that he takes care of her, bil ma'roof, in a good way, not just saying, okay, here's the meat, now go cook it. This is not what the Quran is saying, right? It's bil ma'roof, with love, with ihsan. And again, you have, as we mentioned in the khutbah, in the Prophet, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Look at how the Prophet ﷺ dealt with his wives. So we can read these rights and responsibilities, and also the right of the husband that his wife will follow his lead and take him as the leader of the household and obey him in those things which are not disobedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, it doesn't mean that she cannot give her opinion, that she cannot give her shura, that she can't disagree, but at the end of the day, she takes the husband, it becomes the imam of the house. So these are very clear kind of rubric for rights and responsibilities, and then underneath them you have a whole series of rights and responsibilities. So I think it's very important for not just young couples, but people who have been married to try to find those books, try to find those resources where they can read about what is the right of the husband, what is the right of the wife, what is the responsibility of the husband, what is the responsibility of the wife. The problem is, many times, people will take a hadith and then throw it on the other person and say, see, this is what it says. But the way the Quran and Sunnah is supposed to use is you take the hadith and you apply it to yourself. So, because sometimes the wife will find a hadith about the way the husband should be, and she'll throw it in his face and say, see, you're not doing this. And the husband will do the same thing. He will find a hadith about the way the woman should be. He'll throw it at the face of his wife and say, see, this is the way it's supposed to be, and you're not doing. But it should actually, that sets up conflict. The way it should be is the man looks for the hadith and the verses saying what are his responsibilities, and he focuses on it. And the wife, similarly, she goes to the verses in a hadith and sees what are my responsibilities towards my husband, and they take that seriously as between them and Allah. So it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who set up the system that الرِّجَالُ قَوَّمُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ بِمَا فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ بَعْضَهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. So she is not yielding to her husband because he is somehow superior. No, it's because this is the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that she is yielding to Allah himself, and the husband is also beneath Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in having to fulfill rights and responsibilities. And again, this is a very clear Quranic instruction. وَلَهُنَّ مِثْلُ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَلِلرِّجَالِ عَلَيْهِنَّ دَرَجَةٌ وَاللَّهُ عَزِيزٌ حَكِيمٌ. So it's very clear verses that for them is whatever is expected of them, and the men have the degree, which is the degree of responsibility in the family to provide, to guide, and so on. Wallahu, but then at the end it reminds us, Wallahu Azizun Hakim. But Allah is the one who is the mighty. And Allah is the one who is the wise. So both of them need to submit to Allah. I think sometimes people forget that. Like the man wants to emphasize, you have to listen to me. But it's that the man and the woman need to both encourage and help each other to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this way you take away the conflict of man versus woman, husband versus wife, and you make it more cooperative, that how can we help each other to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why if you look at when Sulaiman brought the queen of Sheba to his kingdom, miraculously of course, he said, well, he brought her throne miraculously, or not miraculously, but somehow from the ilm which Allah had given him amongst his people who were following him. But at the end, she didn't say, Aslamtu li Sulaiman, because she's a queen herself. She didn't say, I have surrendered to Sulaiman, right? Because I think men and women need to realize they have their own individual personalities, they have their own individual volition. So she says, Aslamtu ma'a Sulaiman. So she said, I have surrendered with Sulaiman. So this is ma'a Sulaiman lillahi rabbil alameen. So Allah is above both of us, both husband and wife. But yes, the man does have the leadership of the household as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted to him in the Holy Quran. So I think the way to summarize what I'm trying to say is ask not what your wife can do for you, but what you can do for your wife. And ask not what your husband can do for you, but what you can do for your husband. And if both of them are approaching in that context, then the rights will be mutually satisfied, subhanAllah, without it becoming a fight and so on. So I don't know if there are any questions or comments on that segment before we go to the final segment, and then Sheikh, go ahead, Sheikh Ahmed. Sheikh Ahmed, yeah, that's you, Sheikh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan for the beautiful topic and the very impressive presentation. It's just to touch up on what you just spoke about. SubhanAllah, I was going to ask the question before you actually began to speak. What's your advice to our married community, as well as youth who want to get married, that have this obsession with either siding with red pill or blue pill? And what's your advice how they strike this balance in between, and of course listening to people who are of the red pill, people who are of the blue pill, and then of course the misogynist and then the feminist, and where is it that our youth take their example and their advice on marriage, inshallah?
I think that's a very important question, because when people formulate their personal philosophies and their approaches to life based on reactions, it's very dangerous. Did you want to add something? Red pill and blue pill. So generally it's, so the red pill is talking about where the man needs to be like super dominant, and as the brother used the term, misogynistic, looking down on women. So people, may Allah guide him, because he's Muslim now. Andrew Tate is usually the person associated with that kind of thing. And then blue pill is from the other side, where they sometimes go to the extreme, like after Trump won, there was a movement where women will stop having male partners and being intimate with their male partners. Before, yeah, so they have all these terms.
The movement is called before.
Before, yeah. So the Sheikh, mashallah, is in touch with what's going on, the trends. So that's the general feeling, which is basically reactions to each other, right? And we have to be very careful. Our deen, again, we say it over and over because it's true. Our deen comes from the Quran and the Sunnah. If you want to add the layer of ulama who are interpreting the Quran and Sunnah as well, of course. But I do think that the ulama need to modernize the language, especially when it comes to marriage and the way they talk about marriage. And it's still being true, they just need to go back to the original sources and take from the original sources instead of their particular, like the historical contextualization of some of what has been written about marriage. So I think the best way to approach the young people and so on is to get them more connected and aligned, like an access to the Quran, not just as a book that's read for devotional purposes, but it's actually read as a manual for life. I'm not disregarding or discounting that you get reward for reading the Quran even if you don't understand it, but the point of the Quran is that hudal linnas, it's a guide, it's a blueprint for people to follow. So I think the answer is a very simple one perhaps, but it needs a long application, which is just getting our young people and our married couples that they look to the Quran and Sunnah as their ultimate resource without putting a label on it. Oh, this particular interpretation is a feminist interpretation, this particular interpretation is a misogynistic interpretation, but just suspending, I mean, that's the way we're supposed to approach the deen. We suspend our own whim and desire and our own inclination, and then we read the text, all the text, not just one piece of evidence, but all the evidence about a particular topic, which is what the ulama are doing, and then they give the ruling or the opinion. So we have to be careful. The Quran needs to be in front of us, meaning we're looking at the Quran for its guidance, not behind us, where we put our opinions and then we try to make the Quran conform to our presuppositions and opinions, whatever they may be categorized as right or left or red or blue or whatever, because then in that case, if the Quran is in front of us, leads us to Jannah. If it's behind us, it pushes us into the hellfire. So I think it's a very relevant topic, but again, there is a toxicity. Even they use that word, masculine toxicity. But it goes both ways, toxicity both ways. And it's because I think we have forgotten the Quranic paradigm, which is cooperative model instead of conflict model, which is equality but not sameness, and valuing the man, valuing the woman, without it becoming reactionary. So, because when the pendulum swings, it's swinging all over the place. And then, yes, you are right. Our kids and we are part of the environments, so we can be influenced sometimes by some of these trends and persuasions. So, yes, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. I appreciate your explanation about cooperative relationship rather than adversarial.
Yes.
We had a respected guest last weekend who spoke on a similar topic.
Oh,
And I wanted to probably throw out a couple of thoughts that are more part of modern non-Islamic life to maybe help reconcile it from your perspective. So, general thought is nobody likes to be controlled. Hence, people want to have equal say in things. What you've described about roles and responsibilities in a marriage, it allows certain precedence to one person versus another. And you explained it as it's part of a submission to Allah's order in order to preserve harmony. So I understand that concept. What we see very frequently in societies and applications is you've spelled the responsibilities, and the respected guest said that you have to build consensus to the best you can. You can't be, this is how it is, and like you said, throw the meat and go cook it kind of thing, right? I'll give a very weak analogy. We elect our officials in this country, for example, but there's nothing to oblige them to act with wisdom beyond the power that's given to them. So now they have the authority, but there is nothing to keep them in check until way after the fact. So in Islam, you have to govern, you have to be a leader of a family or take care of your husband's home or whatever responsibility you have on any level. But that wisdom, it's within you and it's self-enforced. So that's where the concern is. People don't want to lose control. They're afraid that there may be a narcissistic person or someone who's doesn't have that wisdom, and now I have to live with the choice because that's my obligation to them. This is how the hierarchy works. I think this is, in my mind, the base root for why people react negatively to hierarchical authority or this clear definition in modern society. Help reconcile it for me, please.
Yeah, mashallah, you summarized very nicely a lot of important points. I think, again, it goes back to it's not a hierarchy or a patriarchy or these kind of things. It's both men and women submitting to Allah, but I do agree, as you put it, it needs to be done of a person's own volition. So a husband cannot be coerced into something, or the wife also cannot be coerced into something. It needs to be because they both heard the hadith, كُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ وَكُلُّكُمْ مَسْئُولٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهِ, that all of you are accountable and answerable. So both the man thinks about, okay, what is my accountability to Allah in this relationship? And the wife also thinks about, what is my accountability to Allah in this relationship? I still think that's the overall thing. In terms of resistance, I agree with you. People, both men and women, they resist a person trying to forcibly change. And our kids also resist it as well. Kids especially, you know, the best word is no, right? I guess if you tell them no. So it does take tactfulness, it does take winning over people, but we do it, I think, through teaching, through knowledge, through good tarbiyah over time, but definitely a lot of patience is required. And both of them, right? So the wife is encouraged to be patient with her husband as he is going through his developmental process, and the husband is encouraged to be patient with his wife as she is going through her developmental process. That's the whole point of rahmah. They're not perfect angels. I'm sure you all are familiar with the hadith where it shows the reciprocal way. Sometimes one could be the one taking the lead in matters of deen. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased and His rahmah for the man who wakes up. I don't know if you guys are going to get up for tahajjud tonight, but who wakes up and instead of just praying by himself, he wakes up his wife to pray with him. And if she doesn't wake up, he sprinkles, doesn't get a bucket and pour it on her face, sprinkles some water. So there's a little bit of encouragement. And then when she wants to get back at him, no, the hadith doesn't say when she wants to get back. But the hadith continues, it says also the woman, Allah's rahmah is pleased. So in this case, the woman is taking the lead spiritually. She gets up for tahajjud. She sees her husband sleeping. She could just do this all by herself. But again, there's a sakina, there's a connection between the husband and wife. I think people, they get turned off when marriage is just presented as some sort of, mechanistic exchange, but they care for each other, right? So she wakes up, she wants her husband to pray with her, she sprinkles some water if he doesn't wake up. So I think to answer your question, we just have to keep on reminding them that both of them should be on a path of self-improvement, but they're helping each other in their reciprocal paths. And their paths have now come to an intersection in their life, and they want to, yes, they're from two separate roots and trees, but those trees have now become intertwined with one another, inshallah ta'ala. So, but yeah, I think to emphasize, it should never be ultimatums, should never be this or else. That's not the way of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. So, yes, brother.
Jazakallah khair. Very important.
Let me see if the sisters have a question, because I've been giving more to the brothers. I don't know, but the sisters are just patiently waiting. Do the sisters have any questions or comments on this? Your perspectives are... We did a session on gender relations with university students, and in that one, the university students, the sisters dominated the conversation and the brothers were all quiet. So it looks like generationally, maybe it's a different, different way. But inshallah, I'm sure the sisters have a lot of things they want to say, inshallah ta'ala. But we'll go with the brother, inshallah. Yeah.
So alhamdulillah, I'm proud to be of the experienced generation. So it's clear that there is an attack on the definition of marriage at a society level. I'm not talking about Islamically, I'm talking about in general. What are your thoughts about collaborating with non-Muslims to regain the right definition of what a marriage is?
Okay, I think that's a good question. So this especially happened, at least it got publicity with the Michigan public schools and their curriculum, and with more evangelical, more right-wing leaning persuasion in this country, and the Muslims kind of collaborated with them. I think that's fine as long as you understand that you're not allowing yourself to be used as a political card, or you're allowing yourself to be used for some other agenda. But if there's legitimate agreement on principles and approaches that are grounded in Christianity, that are grounded in Islam, and that have a commonality, then at least we should have an open discussion with them. They should have open, and then see what are the areas we can work on together and agree together. So I think that's healthy, and it's also an opportunity for da'wah, especially with evangelical Christians. Not only do they not know anything about Islam, the sermons that they get present Islam as, the Antichrist and astaghfirullah, as the devil. So when they begin interacting with Muslims and seeing like, oh, this is what the Christian life is about, is the way these Muslims are living and the way these Muslims are raising their families, then it could be an opportunity for da'wah. But I would be careful about like people trying to use the Muslim community for political purposes, and then when things get tough, they're just ready to throw them under the bus. I think it's a very complicated situation, especially when you look at, many of the Trump appointees. If you look at their views on Islam and the, really bizarre things that they've stated in the past. There is no thing as a Palestinian people and all this. So with that kind of person, he's an evangelical minister. Maybe there's certain things on marriage that we can talk about, but his views on Muslims already is so far outside the box. I would be careful about approaching them. But with the, average evangelical, Christian-minded American, I think there's definitely a lot of room for talking and discussion and even collaboration. So even with the Catholic Church, I remember when I was younger, there was an initiative that Pope John Paul was pushing all through the church to do more interfaith and collaboration with Muslims and these kind of things. So one of the imams from the Azhar who was with us, he told the Catholic bishop at the time in Central Texas, said, we're not going to argue about theology here, but we have to see what are the areas that you feel your religion is calling you to act on. We're going to see what are the areas our religion is calling us to act on, and if they're the same thing, we can cooperate. So things like homelessness, things like poverty, things and so on. So that was his approach, which is like very practical, down to earth. What is going to be the benefit, as opposed to, political maneuvering or photo ops. Those kind of things I would shy away from, because a lot of times Muslims aren't aware that they're being used. One brother mentioned in another city, like there was a mayor who was saying very controversial things, anti-Muslim, Islamophobic things, but for some reason or another he needed the Muslim community on a particular thing. So they had a meeting and everything, and he never changed his position. But then we said, okay, so now let's take some pictures. They're taking pictures of them shaking the hand of the mayor, and they're all happy. Oh, this is the mayor, and the Muslim leader is shaking his hand, and it sent the wrong message that the Muslims are behind this guy. So I think we need to be sophisticated when it comes to like political work, but when it comes to like real legitimate like family to family, church to mosque type engagement, no, I think it should be encouraged. And it opens the door for da'wah also, inshallah ta'ala. All right. So I will wrap up, and then I know Isha is supposed to be at 8, so I'll just do the last segment and then open it for a final round. inshallah. I know we wanted to do Q&A after Isha as well, but maybe we'll just do like open discussion after Isha, inshallah ta'ala. So we talked about Islam, first of all, or the Quranic approach of Sakina, Mawadda, and Rahma, and we talked also about the approach of rights and responsibilities. Now we want to talk about the two major related destroyers of marriage or things which undermine marriage. First one is being self-centered. So, and self-centered goes along with it is arrogance and feeling superiority and all these things. Whether it's from the man's side or from the woman's side, this for sure will either cause a lot of disruption and friction in the marriage or break it completely. So self-centeredness, again, we need to all be going through a process which the ulama in the past, they used to call riyadatun nafs. And then nowadays people call it tazkiyatun nafs, which is we need to be honest with ourselves. Like, why did I say what I said? Why did I do what I did? Why did I even think what I thought? Like, there needs to be times of the day and night where we are introspective, not waiting for the spouse to point it out, like this was this or this was that, but like we, between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, between us and ourselves, holding ourselves, again, the terms that they use as muraqaba and muhasaba, right? I'm sure you've heard those terms. So where you turn the eye inward as opposed to outward. It's something that's attributed to Jesus, peace upon him, to Isa alayhi salam, but also to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is that we notice the speck in our brother's eye and we don't notice the 2x4 going through our own eye. So this is something very dangerous. If we have, and everybody has some aspect of it because it's part of the nafs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. It has both potentialities. They're there. In the same person, he could be or she could be, a great saint, or they could be a great criminal. In the same person. Subhanallah. So that's why Allah said, قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. He said the person who gives attention to their nafs and purifies it and puts it on a path for purification. So the husband needs to be doing this and the wife needs to be doing this independently of each other because they want to be better. They want their nafs to be pure. They want to go from النفس الأمارة بالسوء النفس اللوامة. They want to eventually get to النفس المطمئنة. Like that's their pursuit. The whole thing about Maslow's pyramid where you have self-actualization, but actually beyond that is to go into being in the divine presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So self-centeredness and what comes with it is the arrogance and so on. People say different things about Ihya Ulumuddin and all these, but there's a lot of condensed versions and versions which went through corrections. For example, Minhaj al-Qasidin, which takes that approach. I recommend it for the brothers and sisters. Maybe you can study it together, Minhaj al-Qasidin. It's easier than Ihya Ulumuddin for Imam Ghazali, but basically it takes the same approach, which is there is al-muhlikat and there are al-munjiyat. There are things which bring destruction, like al-kibr, al-hasad, tiba' al-shahawat, all these things which can destroy a person, arrogance, envy, so on. And then there's munjiyat, things which can rescue a person, such as tawbah, such as hope, love, feeling closeness, and joy in being with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, etc. So this topic of riyadat al-nafs and tazkiyat al-nafs is very important for a happy and good marriage, is that the wife is thinking, okay, how can I become better? The husband is thinking, how can I become better? And if both of them are on that path, inshallah, they will help each other. The second one is anger. So in Minhaj al-Qasidin and in Ihya Ulumuddin, there's a whole section just about anger. So remembering to apply what we know. Like everybody already knows, okay, if I'm angry, I make wudu. If I'm standing, I sit down. If I sit down, I lay down. But how many of us apply it? When there's an argument or there's a fight, how many of us, storm out or sometimes even some people get violent? How many actually go and pray 2 rak'at to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, make dua for their partner, make dua for themselves? So applying these things so that decisions which are lifelong impacts are not made impulsively from a point of anger. If you ask, the imams, like all the time people say, oh, I divorced my wife, but I was angry, does it count? It's just, instead of a person, calming down, making rational, cool decisions, people acting out of anger, saying things out of anger, making decisions out of anger, taking positions that are uncompromising positions just because they're angry. This is very dangerous for the marriage relationship. So those two things we need to be careful about and be aware of. We need to ask ourselves seriously, am I a self-centered person? Selfish person? And also, am I able to control my anger? I mean, anger is a natural emotion, but it getting out of control and a person acting out and lashing out of anger, this is definitely against the Shara. And the Prophet ﷺ never did that in his entire life, subhanAllah. But there are evidences where he did get angry. But he would get angry for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not for himself. So this is the overall, inshallah, message I wanted to give tonight. So if there are any questions or comments, especially on the issue of purifying ourselves to be better, for Allah first, but also to be better partners. And then also the problem that comes about with anger, which needs maybe a whole separate lecture just about anger and dealing with it in a healthy way, inshallah. So do the sisters or the brothers have anything about those 2 points? Inshallah. MashaAllah. Okay. Fadal.
I have a question, not about your last 2 highlights, but back to the culture. One of the things that we realize with the young men trying to get married, and again goes back to culture, is they get a lot of resistance. You're not done with school, you don't have a stable career, you're not making X amount of dollars, you're not ready for marriage. And they see that as obstacles to getting married early. So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, inshallah, again, I would just refer them back to the deen. So the Prophet ﷺ said very clear, مَنِ اسْتَطَاعَ مِنْكُمُ الْبَاءَةَ فَلْيَتَزَوَّجْ. So if your son is not in a position where he can support another person, because he needs to understand that it is his responsibility, even though the economic setup in the West is that assumption that men and women are both earning, and this is how they're living, is because they're both earning, it still does not cancel the Islamic responsibility that the man has to provide for his family. It's not going to go away. That's still, so if he reaches that point, tell him once you reach the point of al-ba'a, where you can take care of yourself and take care of your wife, then yeah, go ahead and get married. And if he has, let's say he's a recent graduate, but he's earning now, then I don't think it's wise to delay or push him. If he has that qualification of al-ba'a, it didn't say a degree or didn't say this. If he has the ability to support himself and his spouse, then we should encourage him. If he doesn't, then we tell him to be patient, and we encourage him, as the Prophet ﷺ said, to fast, and so on. So again, I think it requires at some point, like people in the same room having an open conversation. It can be facilitated by organizations or masajid, like forums, between the different generations, on these types of issues, inshallah. Inshallah. Do the sisters have any final words? So you'll be the spokesperson for the sisters, basically. On their behalf, you are. Inshallah. Inshallah.
So I have a question regarding the trend we see in our generation, especially our young females, where they're kind of going with the trend, the strong independent woman, what is marriage is gonna bring to me if I am working, if I'm affording myself. So how do we as parents and as a community correct this marriage picture that's been right now not, or what is the root cause of this drift in this generation?
I think it comes down to the Islamic tarbiyah, not blaming parents, but it's because we live in a society that the underpinning is not Islam, and so the underlying assumptions are not based on Islam. So this is why we have so many problems, both with young men and also young women, in their understanding of what marriage is about and their approach to marriage. But I've seen with my own eyes, subhanAllah, a young sister, super intelligent, but she went to Islamic school her whole life. She's memorizing Quran. She's like, yeah, I'm going to go to college, I'm going to get a degree, but actually what I really want is to be married and to be a Quran teacher. And so she has this, and she grew up here in America. So subhanAllah, I think it's possible, it's with the right environment. I think we should encourage women to get an education, but also encourage them that being a wife that is fully devoted to her household and telling a man to get himself into a situation where she can afford to do that is still the ideal in Islam. We can't hide that. Definitely, there's nothing that prohibits a woman from working, and there's so many obvious evidences for that. But in terms of the norm or the ideal is where the man is outside and the woman is inside. I think some people think, oh, that's old-fashioned, that's this kind of thing. But I think if we can make compromises that don't cause harm to any members of the family, for example, there are people who work from home, people who work part-time, that kind of thing. I think the way to do it is we talk about it more, we educate them more, but that's a big issue. How do we bring the young people to the masjids where they feel sometimes left out or disenfranchised? They even have a term called unmosqued. It's a big phenomenon in the West of young professionals who aren't even going to any masjid. So it's a big challenge, but I think we can, inshallah, sit down and discuss more and talk more. What can we do practically, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Assalamu alaikum. So going back to the ayah that we started the talk with today, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً. So I personally believe that this condition is the backbone of a healthy marriage, like having mawadda and rahmah in the house. And subhanAllah, as you said, the number of divorce cases have been increased much within the Muslim communities and overseas even. And almost always you see a lack of mawadda and rahmah in these houses. So my question for you today is, what are the tips that you advise marriage couple to keep their bucket of mawadda and rahmah, like love, compassion and mercy, almost to full, so that they entertain the healthy marriage all the time?
So this is a whole field that people talk about, and it's okay to go to Western or even non-Muslim authors because there's a lot of things that they say which are still foundationally there in Islam. So for example, I'm sure many of you have heard about the idea of love languages, and there's a whole, book about it. I think understanding how does the other person receive love, how do they perceive love, whether from the man's side or from the woman's side. I think learning about what's available and what's out there, but your question leads a lot to how are we communicating as husband and wife? Do we feel vulnerability? Are we able to be vulnerable with one another as husband and wife without feeling it's going to be used against us? So that idea of trust, because at the end of the day, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he ran to his wife Khadija radiallahu anha when he went through the most traumatic experience, that anybody can go through of receiving divine revelation for the first time. So I think having that opportunity to say, let's grow together. And again, sometimes, I know a lot of times men and sometimes women, they don't like to go to courses, they don't like to do therapy unless things are like way at the end of the line. But I think if you don't like to go to courses, maybe see a good book. And there's a few now by Islamic authors, I don't have any offhand right now. And maybe read it together, study it together, and apply it together. Everybody's so busy, but this is a worthwhile investment. So how to increase the mawadda and the rahmah? I think of applying the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and trying to be like him, and then it will happen naturally from the other side as well, and looking at the wives of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, how much they loved their husbands, Sayyidina Rasulullah ﷺ. I think just remembering all those examples and then applying them. But I think it's a big question, and it's an important question, because the way you framed it is that there's an assumption that this mawadda and rahmah can seep through or be diverted or leave the relationship over time. So how do we replenish it, and how do we shore up and patch up? I think that's a legitimate analogy to think about. So I don't have one particular way that I would say to increase the mawadda and the rahmah, because I think it's for the couple to sit down and honestly, and again, if people aren't used to this, it's very difficult at first, but to honestly talk about, even if there's no obvious problem going on, like where are we at, how do we feel? In the West, they talk about things like date night and all these things, that no matter whatever else is going on, there's a time where you and your spouse will go out or whatever. So even if you're doing Western constructs for certain things, if they're beneficial, then go ahead, inshallah, there's no problem with them. Again, I recommend Family and Youth Institute. They have a lot of stuff with marriage, with youth, and I think they can even come out to your community and do workshops. I think making those available, like let's say a person doesn't want to go to a therapy session, but your masjid is holding a marriage workshop. So it makes it less kind of difficult for them to show up. Okay, I'm going to just sit there and listen. Maybe I'm going to benefit, even participate a little bit. But just like every other participant, nobody is trying to get into my personal affairs and kind of thing. The reasons why people avoid that are myriad, but I think there's benefit even before there are problems. To get a good book, to take a course, or to have a workshop in your masjid, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so it looks like we're going to have adhan, and then iqamah. Iqamah is 8, inshallah. So for this portion, I think are we going to have a continuation, just open? Okay, so we'll do Q&A. Is it okay if we do it about more than just marriage, just to make it interesting for the people who have heard it already from the beginning? Okay, inshallah. So we'll do marriage questions, but also other questions after the Isha, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Jazakumullah.